The scent of Jeremy.
I wonder what that scent is. I've never really thought about it.
I've got 2 bars here.
No
as far
comment. Beautiful.
Yeah, no comment.
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, and of course, I'm better known as the longtime host of Papa Sean's Down Home podcast, where I travel the country reviewing small-town diners, describing roadside attractions, and recounting my interactions with the eccentric locals.
Wow, it sounds like the ultimate comfort podcast to me.
Well, I mean, it's very popular for that reason.
Wow.
The things we don't know about you, Sean.
Yeah, look me up sometime, guys.
Excited to check it out. Well, I'm co-host Jeremy, and guys, I'm in trouble deep.
Oh no.
Oh no. Not again.
I've been losing sleep.
But you need that. It's important.
Sure, but I've made up my mind, guys. I'm keeping my baby.
Your baby has been causing a lack of sleep.
It's Madonna. Papa Don't Preach. Papa John Creach.
Oh, you're right. We're talking about Madonna today. That's right.
No, it's because Papa Don't Preach sounds like Papa John Creach.
Papa Don't Creach.
Wow.
I thought that was Kelly Osbourne.
Oh, let's get this season over with. Jesus.
Yeah, which, speaking of that, I'm co-host Peter Cook, and I messed up, guys. Everything's been really wild with the summer here, and I double booked myself. I'm on vacation right now in Geneseo, New York, so I'm phoning it in for this final album episode of season 5 here. Really phoning it in.
Literally phoning it in.
Yeah. I've had very little time to do research. If this was, I don't know much about Papa John Creach. If this was a San Francisco psychedelic rock episode, I could just phone it in without doing much research. But I think he's like a Chicago musician, blues guy or something.
I think he plays Zydeco.
Zydeco? Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay.
End of the season.
Sean and I will carry you across the line here.
Yeah, with me thinking that we're talking about a Zydeco artist today. Really expecting a lot from me.
You'll kind of follow behind and spot while I carry us across the line.
All right, yeah. I'll just agree with everything you have to say.
Great. Well,
Jeremy, you have it.
I have it. Papa John Creach, self-titled 1971 album on Grunt Records. As Peter alluded to, this is a kind of bluesy thing, but there's some psych stuff going on. And I want to play the first song on the album so that you can hear these things. That's The Janitor Drives a Cadillac, Side A, Track 1.
The janitor drives a Cadillac, big and red. Peter drives his big red car back and forth to work each day, cleaning sinks and scrubbing floors. He knows what it's all for. The people think he's as rich. Well,
they just don't seem to understand it's a bitch, yeah.
the janitor's driving his Cadillac, shiny and new, back and forth to school each day, just knows what he's gotta do. He ain't there to do no study time, to learn how to read or write. Tote that punch, lift that pen.
Well, he's just got to make those car payments now. Fucking away.
Well, I think I'm going to be okay here, guys, because that was the unmistakable voice of Grace Slick in that song.
That sure was.
Along with, I can only guess, the voice of Papa John Creach as well.
That's correct. Along with his violin you heard there as well.
It's a hype sound.
Is it just me, or does that song sound very similar to one or two tracks off the David Bromberg album we covered a little while back?
A little bit.
Maybe Suffer to Sing the Blues.
Yeah.
Oh.
I can hear that.
It's got like just a similar weird energy to it.
Yeah, and like a mixing of blues and psych rock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little frantic and off balance, yet still accomplished.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is same year again, 1971.
True.
Well, also on this song, you heard John Cipollina of Quicksilver Messenger Service on the guitar. You heard Peter Sears on the bass, who's from Jefferson Airplane. Also played with Jerry Garcia, Dr. John, Rod Stewart, all kinds of people. You got Joey Covington on drums from Jefferson Airplane, and also Hot Tuna, the Jefferson Airplane side project. You got Mike Lipskin on organ, who's a stride jazz pianist. Jack Bonus on saxophone. Mike Gillette on trombone from Tower of Power. And Greg Adams, also from Tower of Power, on the trumpet.
It's a damn supergroup backing band.
Yeah, and that's just for this song. Each song has a whole different backing band of just huge names from the psych rock scene, and a smattering of jazz and blues guys in there too.
And how did such a thing happen for a guy who seems to be kind of an obscure name?
Well, I also
don't know.
Beats me.
Who knows? End of episode. So I stumbled upon this album looking for like $3 more on a Discogs order so that I could meet their minimum. And this was a blues album, which those are very rarely cheap. And when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, and it's a good blues album and cheap. And has all the psych stuff. And it says right on the cover, it lists a bunch of names, many of which I just mentioned.
Papa John's friends.
Papa John's friends. The list starts with Grace Slick and ends with Jerry Garcia.
It's a pretty good list.
Yeah, and then there's like 15 names in between. But so yeah, I was like, what in the world is going on with this album? And that's why I brought it today.
I feel like this is I'm also doing what you just described in that I order a record and it's just I need to fulfill like $3 more for the seller, and I look around for something else that we could feature on the podcast, and that's going to be like the new way that we find future features.
Yeah, I found a couple that way, because you end up listening to stuff you might just kind of pass by normally, and you check it out, and you're like, oh, this is pretty good.
This is the our podcast version of online dating.
I was going to say, I feel like you guys have stumbled upon the premise of this show, the online edition.
True.
Yeah, we shop virtually now.
Yeah.
Why go into a record store when you can just
100% digital?
Oh, that's not how we're ending season 5, guys. We still go to record stores. That's where most of these come from still. Calm down.
You're right. I was taking us down a negative route. This is why we need a break.
Yep. Well, let me tell you a little bit about John Henry Creach so that you can understand how in the world this came to be.
Sounds great.
The first detail alone only raises more questions. He was born May 28th, 1917, outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a little far from the scene that he seems to be immersed in on this record.
Yeah, he was 53 years old when his first solo album came out.
Yeah.
So he was born outside Pittsburgh. He moved to Gary, Indiana. And then when the Great Depression hit, his family moved to Benton Harbor, Michigan.
Damn.
Which is less than an hour from where me and Peter normally record here.
Yeah, and about 10 minutes from where I work.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was an interesting fact I found. John's family moved to Chicago in 1935, and that is where John began to study violin at the Conservatory of Music. He got a job with the Illinois Symphony as a music librarian and then would also get to perform occasionally. Unfortunately for John, he was a black man trying to get into the classical scene during the Great Depression, and it just wasn't happening for him. So he learned how to play jazz and blues and rock and pop and just any genre he could learn to be able to get a gig. He would just pick up the genre.
Adaptable.
Yeah, quite adaptable. And also very willing to move along with innovations. In 1943, he started playing an electric violin, which kind of boggled my mind. That was like basically when they first started making electric violins. And he switched right to it right away. And that's where you kind of hear that tone in these songs, like, oh, it's not a normal violin. It kind of, I'm not sure how to describe the difference. It feels a little more direct, a little less resonant.
Yeah, and it just sounds ripe for psychedelic music.
Yeah, I think that's why it ended up breaking him into the psych rock scene later on, because it's like very, that music has very full, cluttered mixes, so it's hard to cut through it. And electric violin is good at cutting through it.
It brings a more traditional roots-sounding instrument into the mix without sounding antiquated, at least at that time, 50 plus years ago.
Yeah. He is playing electric violin. He moves to LA in 1945 and gets a gig playing on a cruise ship for 5 years. He was out playing cruise ships in LA. And he also, after that, got to perform in a movie with Nat King Cole, Blue Gardonia. And
yeah, directed by Fritz Lang.
Yeah.
Wow.
In 1953. So yeah, that kind of, it didn't really break him at all though. It's like he was sort of known after that, but he wasn't famous or anything. He was still playing clubs, playing restaurants, bars, whatever gig he could get.
This feels, in a way, like one of the most atypical arcs we've ever had on the show. Started playing classical in the 30s, almost a movie star in the 40s.
Yeah, it's unusual, and that was kind of what attracted me to this record, was its unusual nature, that mix of psych and blues, the fact that it's even a cheap record and is bluesy at all, which I feel like is hard to find these days.
Yeah, true.
So he's bumming around LA, playing gigs, and he meets Joey Covington in 1967 when he's down at the Musicians Union office just looking for gigs to do. And him and Joey hit it off.
And Joey is Jefferson Airplane, right? That's what we said?
Well, I was getting there, Sean. Calm down.
I thought you were just expecting us to remember from that list of musicians after the first track.
No, I wouldn't do that to you. But 3 years later, Joey would join a little band called Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah, I was going to say in 67, Spencer Dryden would have been Jefferson Airplane's drummer, but that matches.
Yeah. And he calls his old buddy John and says, hey, you should come play with us. And John comes out, does one gig with them, and they immediately offer him a position in the band. Let's play another tune before we go any further there, but that's Papa John's big break right there.
Yeah, I mean, that answers Sean's question that started you off on this. How did he get all these psych players on this album?
Yeah, he was in Jefferson Airplane.
So you too can work on a cruise ship in Los Angeles for 5 years and then hit the big time.
And gig in clubs and stuff for 20 years.
Yeah. Has your classical and acting career stalled out? Don't worry, you've still got a shot.
You might be in your 50s when it happens.
Yeah. Never give up, guys.
Well, I want to feature a little more bluesy tune on this album. That's Papa John's Down Home Blues.
It's a good title. It's got a good feel to it. I like that.
You like that one? This is side A, track 3.
I was born on a farm, way, way, way down home. I was born on a farm, way, way, way down home. I was fat on the farm, now I'm skinny as a bone. I used to eat way down home 3 times every day. I used to eat way down home 3 times every day. City life ain't the same. No way, no way. Women here, all I see, cold as they can be. Women here, all I see, cold as they can be. Can I find anyone to love poor lonely me? Going back, yes I am.
That song was not quite as star-laden as the first one. It only features Bruce Conti on guitar from Tower of Power and Carlos Santana also on guitar of Santana.
Right, that Carlos Santana. Okay.
Yeah. You got Douglas Rausch on bass, who played with Santana, but also played with David Bowie, Betty Davis, bunch of big folks. You have Tony Smith's first recording on drums, and he would go on to play with Santana, Jeff Beck, Serge Gainsbourg, and Lou Reed.
It's a pretty good list.
Yeah. And finally, you got Nick Buck on piano from Hot Tuna and the Whiskey Priests. So, some big names there again. You got that Chicago electric blues kind of sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think the presence of Carlos Santana alone makes it a star-studded affair.
Yeah, it's just every song has a ridiculous lineup behind him. Very cool setup, Papa John. Well done.
Yeah. And yet the album just has this very like loose kind of fun vibe to it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he just got a studio and just kept calling anyone from the scene he could get to come down.
Yeah, just as buds.
Well, you said this is on Grunt Records.
That is
And
accurate.
That's Jefferson Airplane's label.
Yeah.
Yeah, from what I remember with that label, the Grunt label, they were trying to get a bunch of releases out when they established it. And that was right around this time. So I'm guessing, yeah, they probably got him studio time and assembled some players and got him in there.
And it was a bit of a trend at the time, too, for some of these younger psych players to form backing bands for some, like, older generation of musicians and kind of do that iconoclast type mix there. I mean, like, Hooker and Heat was the same year as this album.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like these bands, a lot of the psychedelic bands from the scene, they were very blues inspired, but they often at this point, just due to the nature of the psychedelia that they were playing, they weren't getting to do as much of that style of playing as they probably had cut their teeth on. So it was probably for them fun to just go back to their roots.
Yeah, definitely.
That probably is also the motive behind Hot Tuna, which was a side project of Jefferson Airplane that is pretty much just Jefferson Airplane without Grace Slick, because she got a vocal node that required surgery and couldn't sing for a while. So they were like, let's make this band and play blues. So that's what Hot Tuna was, and Papa John also played with them in this time period.
Yeah, that debut Hot Tuna record is one that I might be bringing sooner or later. You can still find that plentifully and inexpensively. And it's a great record.
Yeah, good stuff. Papa John would go on to do a few more solo albums. His next few were with a backing band, Zulu, which included blues guitarist Keb Mo. Also around this time, Jefferson Airplane was transforming into Jefferson Starship when they put out the Red Octopus album that was much bigger than any Jefferson Airplane album before it. Papa John just thought it was too much.
He didn't like that shift in direction.
From interviews I'd read with him, it seemed like it was more how big the crowds had gotten and how much of his life it just felt like it ate up at that point. So it was just too much for him, is how he described it. So he amicably stepped away. He would, continue playing with them occasionally on shows throughout the rest of his life. So it wasn't like a bad blood thing. He just couldn't do the superstardom thing.
Well, I mean, he got big at the age when a lot of other people are slowing down and retiring. So I'm not surprised that he didn't want to keep that going for a super long time in his 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. But he didn't remain in the big time spotlight. He didn't stop doing music. He kept going. He put out his second to last solo album in 1978 with a backing band, Midnight Sun. From there, in 1982, he went on to play with San Francisco supergroup Dinosaurs. There was a bunch of people from this, psych rock scene. And they were also the band, I found out, that forced Dinosaur Jr. to add the Junior to their name.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I think they were originally Dinosaur, but it was too close, and they were legally had to change it to something to distinguish it. Added the Junior.
Yep. Papa John put out his 8th and final solo album, Papa's Blues, after a 14-year gap there. And that album is just a straight-up blues album. There's no hint of psychedelia or classical that he originally cut his teeth on, or jazz. It's just pure blues.
Back to the basics.
Back to the basics. That was in 1992. He suffered a heart attack during the Northridge earthquake in 1994, and then would succumb to congestive heart failure about a month later at the age of 76.
Yeah, so he's that's 30 years ago now.
Yeah, and I feel like, maybe it's because Jefferson Airplane / Starship hasn't really been in the public eye, but I've never heard his name before I stumbled on this record, so.
Yeah, and he was only active in 7 different decades.
Yeah.
Yeah, he comes into the San Fran scene, it seems, just a little after the time period that I was really familiar with, and so I just don't pay attention to the records that come in 71 and after.
Makes sense. Well, I wanted to feature another song with some strong psychedelic leanings and featuring the guitar of Jerry Garcia. And that song is Soul Fever, which is side B, track 4.
I really like that track on the album. It reminds me a lot of the kind of thing that Booker T and the MGs were doing around this time. Like, that sounds like it could have been an unreleased track from the Melting Pot Sessions, the album they put out in early 1971.
It's a very Booker T sound.
Yeah, and even the guitar Jerry was doing had a little bit of that Steve Cropper kind of percussiveness to it.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and you can tell it's a Jerry solo because there's a couple bends that don't sound quite right, but they're still very expressive. He's one of the all-time greats at hitting a wrong note and still making it work.
That's improv.
Yeah. It took me a long time to understand what was so great about his guitar playing, but that's a great example of it right there.
One day you can teach me the secret, Peter.
We'll sit down with a few joints and nothing else to occupy our time but Live Dead.
All right. A stack of tapes.
Yeah. They have to be on cassettes.
Yeah.
Third generation.
As mentioned, that's Jerry Garcia on guitar. He got David Brown on the bass of Santana fame. Got Joey Covington, the Jefferson Airplane drummer we mentioned earlier in the story. And on organ, Greg Rowley, who helped found Santana, also founded the band Journey. And to tie back an old connection we used to make, this guy was also in one of Ringo's all-star bands.
Dang, a real all-star.
I thought you were going to say there was a Tupac connection.
That's what I was ready for as well.
There might be. I didn't go hard enough on that.
I mean, we're not too far from Oakland, so it's possible, but many years removed from Pac's heyday.
True. Yeah, that's Papa John. That's this album. He's got a handful of other albums and a lot of stuff he plays on if you dig his electric violin sound. So now we turn our attention to Sean.
Ooh, I know what this is about.
Yeah, our resident recommender.
That's me.
What albums would you recommend?
I had a bit of a tough time selecting this because I really wanted to find stuff that captures the spirit, and there's not a lot of like perfect parallels to this, but I've got 4 selections that I think should all collectively get you pretty close, and I think you'll like them. First one, previously featured artist Charles Lloyd in his 1971 album Warm Waters. This is an example of some more younger West Coast musicians experimenting with a player who's not as famous and doing some kind of experimental music to interesting results.
I really like the collab he did with the Beach Boys.
They're on that album.
Yeah.
On Warm Waters. It's weird stuff, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, so it's still cheap. Check it out. Next recommendation, a lesser-known violin player, one of the few black violin players out there, Don Sugarcane Harris. His 1971 album Fiddler on the Rock. Doesn't have a lot of material, also not very famous, but that album has a similar vibe to this one, a sense of experimentation, a little bit more like jazz R&B leanings going on, but great record.
You know how you like album titles that are puns on the artist's name? I like ones that are puns on musicals. So I'm sold on that already.
Yeah, we all find the things that we like. Next recommendation, another famous violinist. This one is leaning much more into the country music territory, but he also was infamous for combining newer influences with roots sounds. I'm talking about Doug Kershaw and his 1972 album Swampgrass.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, there's the Kershaw brothers, who are both great musicians, influential players, did a lot of studio work, and you can get a real deep dive on their story from the Cocaine and Rhinestones podcast.
Yeah, they did some They were on some famous Neil Young stuff.
Yeah, all over the place. Last recommendation. So we're talking about violinist. One guy who is kind of an underappreciated violinist, David Campbell. You guys remember that name?
Yeah. He was
Father of
Beck.
Yeah. Yeah, violin player among his many other talents.
Mentioned on our first episode, Jimmy Spheris.
How dare you ruin my joke, Peter?
Oh, no. You got to get there quick.
I was just going to say, if you want to hear an example of David playing violin, I really like his album Isle of You by Jimmy Spheris from 1971.
I mean, I'm sorry, Sean. It's the end of the season. What can I say?
It's the end of the season. That's fine. That's fine.
What better way to round out the end of season 5? 5 years.
Yeah,
to
by
point-
Peter stepping on me trying to make the same joke for the 100th time.
I should have seen it coming and known.
Yeah, 1971. I know what this fucker's going to do.
Wow.
Well, so we should mention now before we wrap things up here that this is the last album that we're featuring of the season, but we will have our traditional wrap-up episode yet to come next week. So we'll be talking about some of our favorite selections from the season and looking back on our fondest memories, like, you know, Sean bringing up Jimmy Spheris as many times as possible and making Jeremy groan. Those kind of things. Gumbo, I'm sure will make an appearance.
Yuck. I love eating gumbo too.
Yeah, you do. We've made it together several times.
I know. I miss those times.
Aw.
Well, let's round that corner. Let's head for the finish line. I'm going to pick for our last song of the season,
Ooh, what's it going to be?
Over the Rainbow.
Ooh, interesting choice.
Yeah. You can think dreamily back upon all your favorite episodes while you listen to this. Papa John would also do this song with Jefferson Starship when he did play with them. And a few times he went back and would play shows with them here and there. And when he did, right before a set break, it would be him and the organ player just doing a rendition of this song. And people ate it up. Be standing ovations everywhere.
Okay, he does a very surprisingly emotional rendition of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that if you're going to do it, put some heart into it.
Right, got you.
Yeah, we don't need another lame version of it.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a great rendition. I like some of the... I'm not a violinist, so I don't know what to call it, but I almost want to say glissandos, like dissonant glissandos that he does here and there throughout it.
Kind of sliding up to the notes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and down, like there's several moments where it just extra character
Yeah.
without being distracting. He's a pro.
He's a pro. We'll leave it at that. Papa John's a pro. Well, that's going to be side A, track 5, and I'm going to be co-host Jeremy.
And I'm going to be co-host Peter.
And I'm going to be, and have already been, co-host Sean Hartman.
Oh, you have a last name now.
Yeah.